Hey everybody, Zeal Brothers here once again with another video bringing the truth to the aged and the youth. And we want to ask this question, is Prince William a racist? Now, he gave a speech and he made some comments apparently linking human population in Africa to pressure on wildlife. And this is his quote. The increasing pressure on Africa's wildlife and wild spaces as a result of human population presents a huge challenge for conservationists, as it does the world over. But it is imperative that the natural world is protected, not only for its contribution to our economies, jobs, and livelihoods, but for the health, well-being, and future of humanity. We owe it to our children and future generations to act now. So a lot of people are condemning it because he's talking about Africa's populations, and people are saying, well, he wants less African kids. How convenient for him. And so people are making these arguments, and it's kind of funny because it is funny to me how quickly people jump to racism all the time, the label. So let's just examine this argument a little bit. First question is he racist for these comments? I don't know if he's racist, but he's not racist for these comments. And the reason that he is not is because that is not his intention. Every time that somebody disagrees with somebody, you don't have to assume the worst. That is the worst form of argument. To assume somebody's intentions are always negative. It's a form of a straw man argument where you assume that you can understand the motivations of your opponent, and you don't try to attack his arguments for his merits. You try to attack it for the intentions of the person who says it. And the truth of the matter is, even if somebody has bad intentions, that doesn't mean that they have a bad argument. So, for example, Hitler could have said 2 + 2 is 4. He could still be right. Just because it's Hitler, just because he's a massive racist and he's an evil dude, doesn't mean he can't be right about something he says. So even if you do impugn somebody's motivations, that does not in itself disprove their argument. So that is the first problem with calling him a racist. Now, is he right? Well, I do think it is very convenient for a lot of conservationists. They always go to these places that are very richly tropical, and they have poor populations, and they always worry about those people and how much they're doing. And the truth of the matter is that when you go to the average environmentalist, the things that he or she cares about seem to have very little impact on the environment. And I'll give you an example. There's a lot of environmentalists who care a lot about, for example, plastics. And while I understand their concerns about plastics, or they'll, for example, here's the one they really care about. They really care a lot about the fracking. And when you look at fracking and the impact on the environment, and then you compare that to a Chinese industrial company, the amount of pollution comparatively is no comparison. When you look at, for example, just the average environmental impact of American industry versus Chinese industry or Russian industry or African industry, it is just incomparable. But the environmentalists will target the one and not the other. And oftentimes the environmentalist motivations is hard to truly understand. They just are very emotionally led. So when you hear this argument, he's talking about these populations, it is weird that he would say that, because ultimately, there's this big argument in a lot of environmentalist circles, which basically makes the argument that the human population is just too much, too many people. And that argument has been made so many times, and it's always been proven false. Why? Because when human population grows, that in itself, let's make this argument. The human economy is not static, it's dynamic. So let me give an example. Let's say that we double the population tomorrow. That will cause problems. But that's not how populations happen, right? They double over time. And the pressures of those populations create incentives for people to do more. So, for example, let's say that you have greater population where land that wasn't farmed before will start to be farmed. People will eat foods they wouldn't have eaten before. Some prices will go up, yes, but the prices going up mean more people will jump into farming to take advantage of those higher prices. And ultimately what happens is what you think of as the farming output of the whole world is not truly the farming output of the whole world. It is simply supply meeting demand. This is something economists always have understood, right? When people have demand, there will be a supply for it. The same thing with the population. People talk about how there's overpopulation, there'll be overcrowding. In some places there is a lot of people. But the truth of the matter is that's because that's how people want to live. If you look at the whole world and you really fly, right? I just challenge people who think that the world is overpopulated and it's too crowded. Fly over Russia, fly over China, fly over the Midwest of the United States, fly over Canada, and you will be shocked at how much space there is. There is so much space. Some people have said this argument that the whole world's population could fit in the state of Minnesota. I'm not so sure that that is a logical argument, because then you would have to have an infrastructure for everybody. But still, that argument could still be made that the population of the world is nowhere near the max that the world can handle. And that is true. So when you talk about the world's population and whether that has an impact on the environment, that itself is true, right? If there are more people, then you'll have to do more to feed those people. That is true. But at the same time, doing more to feed those people will also mean you have to do more planting of trees. You have to do more planting of plants, etc. So it's not necessarily going to have a negative impact on the environment, but does it have more pressure? Yes, it does. It also has more pressure to conserve. So give this example. Let's say you're talking about corn. The population of the world increases, there'll be more demand for corn, but there also will be more fields that get planted with corn that are right now just lawns. And so it's just kind of interesting to me, some of the arguments people make, they act like the world is static, and it's really not static. It's dynamic. Now, could there be a limit where the world couldn't go past a certain point? I could perceive that, but the truth of the matter is really no. Because ultimately, at some point, you will keep increasing the population and people will simply have to diversify what they eat, or they'll have to do things that they don't normally do now. They will still survive. So I'm not so sure that there would be a limit to how big the population could get on this planet, other than simply the area that people could even fit in. So that argument is itself is a complex argument, but ultimately it's mostly false. So is Prince William a racist? No. A lot of people have made arguments about the economy being static. And if you go back to the 1970s and you talk to read at some of the papers, people were talking about the world being overpopulated then. And people were talking about the world running out of oil then. And then in the 90s, people made arguments like that again. And then in the 10s, people made arguments again. And the truth of the matter is that people will not run out of many of the basic resources simply because of the fact that we don't know what the limits of those resources are, because it's not profitable to look for all of those. So just a lot of arguments that are made that are really flawed, not really looking at the whole big picture. But is Prince William a racist? He ain't no racist. Not for these comments. Maybe he is in his own private life. That's for people who know him to really interpret, but not for us just looking at this speech here. Was it a stupid speech? It's flawed speech. I wouldn't say it's a stupid speech, but it ain't any dumber than most environmentalists out there. They basically a pretty dumb crowd in general. All right, so thank you guys for listening. That's the Zeal Brothers reaching out, speaking to the people, speaking truth. Subscribe if you can, and support this channel.